First King chapters 9 and 10. Here we go again, Papa John's Scripture Notes, chapter 9 of 1 Kings. We're going to call this episode King Solomon's Wisdom, Wealth, and Weakness. Unfortunately, the cracks in his character begin to appear. We've seen hints of them, but now we'll see them manifest more boldly, unfortunately. May we all learn from King Solomon's mistakes, supposedly the wisest man in the Bible, and obviously wealthy beyond what I can even begin to imagine. But we all have weaknesses, and may we just learn from his mistakes and not do the same and be on guard for the flesh and our appetites and such. Verse 1, we're going to get straight into this, and you'll see 3 times right here. Verse 1, 2, and 3 have the restored divine name, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, with the Cholam and the Shavah and the Kamats. The vowel markers all restored. I love the story. Take time and read Nehemiah Gordon's book called The Conspiracy of Silence, and how the Hebrews, the Israelites, have been hiding from the Christians the divine name and gleefully happy that they're talking about God and calling him Yahweh and things like that. It's quite amazing. And it took me a while to accept this as truth. It took me a while, but after my experience with God the Father in May of 2017, I could no longer consider it as a possibility and keep it on the shelf. I had to realize how perfectly the Father's name in Hebrew and the Son's name in Hebrew point back and forth towards each other. And it's a beautiful, beautiful message. But let's just stay focused here. Verse 1, 2, and 3. And it came to pass when Solomon had finished the building of the house of Jehovah and the king's house, and all of Solomon's desire, which he was pleased to do. Verse 2, that Jehovah appeared to Solomon the second time as he had appeared to him at Gibeon or Givon. Verse 3, and Jehovah said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever, and mine eyes and mine heart shall be there perpetually. Wow, so his eyes and his heart will be there perpetually, whereas the name is forever, which in Hebrew may not mean for eternity, and definitely not perpetually. I think that's an interesting insight. Perhaps we just scratched below the surface of the ink on the page with just that little insight right there. But let's see what else we can discover so we understand the scriptures as far as they're translated correctly. They're not infallible. They're inspired. They're God-breathed. I love them. They're the canon of scripture, the measuring rod by which I compare, the standard by which I compare my beliefs, behaviors, and doctrines and such that I follow. But they're not infallible. If Papa John's episodes haven't made that clear by now, I don't know how much more clear I can be, but that's okay. Oh, well, it might not be okay. It's up to us now. This puts a greater responsibility on us to know. But that's part of the reason why I do this Papa John's Scripture Project. Is because whatever ground I've gained with the footnotes from Bible scholars and insights and revelations, if I can help my children and my children's children, future posterity, extended family today, my friends today, not have to start at ground zero with just the King James Version of the Bible or other English versions of the Bible, and we can already have a little bit of an advantage. That has value to me. It does. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. If not today and now, that's fine. But someday it's going to be here. Let's hope. If there's power, the computer turns on, and we have access to the Google Drive, we'll have access to this, these scripture notes. Verse 4, and if thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments. I think David repented in a way that God can say that and it be a truth instead of a falsehood. It's important that we not judge King David ourselves. Leave judgment to God. That's important. But that's quite the statement considering what we learned about David's personal story. Verse 5, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David, thy father, saying, thou shalt not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. But if ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, but go and serve other Elohims, lowercase e, lowercase gods, Elohims, and worship them. Verse 7, then I will cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house, which I have hallowed for my name, will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And at this house which is high, everyone that passeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss, and they shall say, why hath Jehovah done thus unto this land and to this house? And they shall answer, because they forsook. So if the temple's destroyed and gone, and the place is in ruins, verse 9 explains why Jehovah has done this to this land and to this house. Verse 9, and they shall answer, because they forsook Jehovah their Elohim, who brought them forth, their fathers, out of the land of Egypt, and have taken hold upon other Elohims, and have worshipped them and served them. Therefore hath Jehovah brought upon them all this evil. And it came to pass at the end of 20 years, when Solomon had built the two houses, the house of Jehovah and the king's house. Now pause for a moment. We read the chapter about the building of the temple, it took 7 years, and we were like, that's cool, the symbolic number for completion. Okay, wholeness. And then the next chapter we read was Solomon building his personal residence, and he worked on it 14 years, which was the hint of his first character flaw, making his own house more important than God's house. And in this verse, it says he continued to work on both houses in some fashion, I guess, for 20 years. Unbelievable. Talk about wealth and prosperity. Okay. Verse 11, now Hiram, or Hiram, the king of Tyre, or Zor, has furnished Solomon with cedar trees and fir trees and with gold, according to all his desires. That then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. And Hiram came out from Zor to see the cities which Solomon had given him, and they pleased him not. Uh-oh. And he said, what cities are these which thou hast given me, my brother? And he called them the land of Kabul, or in Hebrew, Kabul, unto this day. So Papa John had to look that word up. So Kabul, Hebrew word, is a derogatory name given by King Hiram of Tyre to a region of 20 towns in Galilee gifted to him by King Solomon. It's a wordplay that translates to good for nothing or as good as nothing. Wow, after all he did with all his skills to build these magnificent structures, the king's house and the Lord's house, he's not happy with what the king gifts him with. And I'm not sure I know enough information to know who's at fault more here. But verse 14, and Hiram sent the king 60 talents of gold. Verse 15, and now I'm going to introduce you to Matthew Vanderell. Who's Matthew Vanderell? He's a Messianic pastor, I believe in North or South Carolina. Very young man, but very insightful. A few times I've been introduced to him. I liked what he taught me here, and I've inserted it as part of the Papa John scripture notes. So he's going to take us through verse 15 and a few others. Here we go. King Solomon, Matthew says, is the most praised and successful king of the Israelite monarchy, which only lasted for 3 kings. Wow. But regardless, he not only was the one who secured all the borders to Israel, he made treaties and he made peace with the surrounding countries. It was a big deal. He built a successful army, and he's also the one who built the first temple to God. And in 1 Kings, specifically through chapters 9 and 10, it intentionally uses a writing style to create an excitement and a type of like, wow, he did all this stuff. It takes us into King Solomon's trophy room. And unfortunately, it describes what would be the worldly climax of the Israelite culture. This is the best that they're ever going to be before they start spiraling downward. So let's read about the great temple that King Solomon built. Verse 15, listen to the language. This is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon drafted to build the house of Jehovah and his house and his own house and the Milo and the wall of Jerusalem and Hazar and Megiddo and Geyser. So here's the account of the people that King Solomon forced. He forced them to do what? Matthew says, to build the great structures in his city. And how many of us gloss over that? Most of us read that verse and only notice he's successful. He's a successful king and he's an Israelite king and God's on his side. But we're supposed to say, wait a second, maybe that's just the way things were back then. I guess slavery's okay. No, this is the temple of the God who freed Israel from slavery. Think about that. The God who frees slaves. Yet King Solomon has leveraged through the power of the nations surrounding them, these weaker nations, he's leveraged them to be slaves, to build the great structures in his own country, just like the Israelites were doing back in Egypt. And so we start to see this overlay of Egypt that Israel came from, and now it's Israel doing it back, or doing it, if you will. And in verse 19, it continues. But before we get to 19, Papa John's going to read the verses in between. 16 says, for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gezer and burnt it with fire and slain the Canaanites that dwelt in the city and given it for a present to his daughter, Solomon's wife. Well, that's interesting. So there's not just peace and prosperity, there's a little bit of political power struggles and wars going on that affect the Israelite kingdom and the kingdom of Egypt. And so they have to rebuild. So verse 17, and Solomon built Gezer and Beth Horon, Beit Horon, the neither. Now, what is this talking about? So I had to look that word up as well. Neither is an Old English adjective meaning lower or bottom-most. It refers to the lower of two twin cities in ancient Israel. The Beit Horon, the neither, the lower Beth Horon, and the Beth Horon, the upper Beth Horon. So it's a community that has the up side of town and the downtown, or anyway, you get the gist of it. Verse 18, and Baalat and Tadmor in the wilderness in the land, and all the cities of the store that Solomon had, and the cities for his chariots. Now, when you see chariots, we're talking about war. You know, we're talking about, we would call them tanks, but chariots. This is his preparations for war. And the verse continues, and cities for his horsemen, those would be his army, his warriors, and that which Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon and in all the land of his dominion. So again, Matthew Vanderel, our messianic pastor, says, all the cities of store that Solomon had, and the cities for his chariots and his horsemen, and whatever King Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon and in all the land of his dominion. So I need to pay attention to my notes. I read it twice. I apologize. Verse 20, Matthew reads it for us. All the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Pezerites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who are not of the people of Israel. Verse 21, their descendants who were left after them in the land, whom the people of Israel were unable to devote to destruction. Remember, God told them to destroy them all, but they were unable to devote them to destruction. That's an interesting way to phrase it. These Solomon drafted to be slaves, and so they are to this day. Now, in the King James, he called them bond service, and to this day, but it's slavery. It's just a more polite way. The King James translators didn't like that word slavery, I'm sure. Verse 22, Matthew reads, But of the people of Israel and Solomon made no slaves. So the Israelites are free. They were soldiers. They were his officials, his commanders, his captains of his chariots and commanders and his horsemen. Then Matthew Vanderall adds, so all of the weaker nations Solomon exploited, and instead of being the nations that needed to be wiped out or pushed out as the Lord commanded, no, Solomon says, I have a better idea. I can profit off of them. And so he leverages them and turns them into slaves. Now, notice that he has cities set up just like his chariots. Now, this isn't like Jay Leno's car enthusiast, the car enthusiast with all of his collective cars. No, chariots are synonymous with tanks. He was creating a war machine so that this was a military base. The outpost of Hazor and Middadu, Ordo, and Gezer. So he built his house, he built the temple, and then he reinforced it with the military outpost all around. Let's continue, verse 23. These were the chief officers who were over Solomon's work, 550 in charge of the people who carried on the work. Verse 24. But Pharaoh's daughter went up to the city of David to her own house that Solomon had built for her. Then he built the Milo. So again, one of those things we gloss over, Matthew says, the daughter of Pharaoh is basically his consort, his concubine, his wife, and she has her own house right there. And at this point, we're supposed to kind of see that overlay between Egypt and King Solomon. And that overlay is intentional by the author. And it's like, oh, he's in bed with Egypt. It's becoming that. And then in the next chapter, chapter 10, reviews the splendor of the most powerful riches that came to Solomon and his achievements, and they were brought from the Queen of Sheba, right? And when she comes in and she sees everything, she lavishes the wisdom and the beauty of all the things that Solomon has. She's marveled. And she says this in chapter 8, or verse 8 of chapter 10, but we're going to hold off on that verse when we get to chapter 10. Let's finish chapter 9. Verse 25. And 3 times in a year did Solomon offer burnt offerings. And remember, that's from the Torah. I think the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy talk about every male Israelite should go up 3 times a year. So this is good. He's keeping the Torah. And 3 times in a year did Solomon offer burnt offerings and peace offerings upon the altar which he built into who? To Yehovah. And he burnt incense before the altar that was before Yehovah. So he finished the house, and Papa John had the pleasure of restoring the name twice. The divine name is right there in verse 25 twice. And then we're going to finish the last 3 verses of chapter 9, and then we'll get into the Queen of Sheba with chapter 10. Verse 26, and King Solomon made a navy of ships in Azion Gaver, which is beside Elot, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram, remember, Hiram sent in the navy his servants, a shipman that had knowledge of the sea with the servants of Solomon. And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold 420 talents and brought it to King Solomon. So somehow Hiram is still willing to work and play along with King Solomon, even though he was disappointed in the Galilee, the gift of the Galilee. Now, now we're at chapter 10 of 1 Kings, and the companion chapter is 2 Chronicles chapter 9. And so we won't do it in this episode, but just know those 2 chapters to compare or read them simultaneously, side by side, verse by verse, can be very helpful for the additional insights that you can get, similar to how we read in the New Testament the 4 Gospels, and how one author records something that another author fails to. Okay, verse 1, 1 Kings, chapter 10. And when the queen of Sheba, or Shiva, heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of Yehovah, I think that's interesting that she heard of the fame, and that includes the name of the God of Israel, of Yehovah himself. She came to prove him with hard questions. And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train with camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him all that was in her heart. That's interesting verbiage. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. Now that's that's what do you call that? You know, if you have top secret information, that's treasonous to share it. Solomon is being, well, his manly flesh perhaps is swayed by her wealth and her beauty and her status. They're two famous and important people from their own nations. He sees her perhaps more like an equal. He's let his guard down. I believe personally, Papa John, and I haven't had time to research it, but if he's sharing this type of information with a leader of another nation, that's going to come back to bite him. This can't be a good thing to be so open as if he's bragging and he's taking pleasure in his own identity and talking about himself and his kingdom and all that he's done. That's again his weaknesses that were cracks are now beginning to become larger and more evident. Verse 4. And when the queen of Sheba, no, oh, I'll stick with the Christian name Sheba. When the queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and a cupbearer is there to make sure he doesn't get poisoned, right? And his ascents by which he went up into the house of Jehovah, there was no more spirit in her. Now, what's that describing? And she said to the king, It was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes have seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. Verse 8, happy. Okay, Matthew Vanderell is going to take us again through the verses. Happy are men, happy are your servants who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. She's buttering him up, if I could only speculate. Verse 9, Matthew's taken us through this one as well. Blessed be Yehovah, your Elohim, that is delighted for Israel forever. Who, or he says, wow, Matthew says. So we're supposed to choke right now. The author is trying to help us choke as we compare this overlay of Israel and the comparison of Egypt and how they're looking so much alike. We're supposed to choke right now because she's claiming, oh, you're executing justice and righteousness. You're executing justice and righteousness, but he's really building an empire with a war machine. And this is all built on the backs of weaker people. This actually makes Papa John uncomfortable as I think of America and how we rule the world, not because we serve the true and living God, but because we have the most powerful army. This overlay is beginning to affect how I feel about my country, the United States of America. And I'm very patriotic and I love my country, but do we have a Jekyll and a Hyde personality as well right here in the United States? It's something to consider. Matthew continues. And so we continue reading through this, and we remember in Deuteronomy 17, verses 16 through 17, where it states 3 things the king should never have in Israel. You can't have too many horses because that is military power. That breeds violence. That breeds conquest, just like all the other nations. He should never have many wives. Don't do that. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. Don't be that guy that has all the gold in the world, all the wealth in the world, because that also corrupts and breeds power and conquest through war and violence. Yet here, what do we see in verse 26 of chapter 10? Well, Papa John's going to read verse by verse. We'll get to verse 26 soon, but here we are in verse 10. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold. Wow. And of spices, very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. And the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir, and brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. And the king made of the almug trees pillars for the house of Jehovah and for the king's house, harps also, and satyrs, psalter. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Psalterers for singers. There came, those might be like tambourines if I had to guess. They came no, there came no such almug trees, nor were seen unto this day. So it's a very rare type of wood. Verse 13, and King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, besides that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. And there's the companion verse in 2 Chronicles to compare that to. Verse 14, now the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. I'm sure if you Googled that, we would all be amazed at how much gold that would be in today's world. 15, besides that he had of the merchantmen and of the traffic of the spice and the merchants and all the kings of Arabia and the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went to one target. And he made 300 shields of beating gold. 3 pounds of gold went to one shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with the best gold. And the throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind, and there were stays on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays. And 12 lions stood there on one side and the other upper the 6 steps. There was not the like made in any kingdom. And all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Wow. It was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon. For the king had for the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. So every 3 years they would return with their bounty as they were marauding and, I guess, taking by force, exercising their strength against foreign nations and countries and such. Verse 23, so King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which Elohim had put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and garments and armor and spices, horses and mules, a rate year by year. So this is a thriving economy, a world, the largest economy for their time, which again reminds me of how the world depends on America's economy just for them to keep up with their gross national product and what they need to survive as a nation. And the whole world is dependent on America. I see the overlay between the comparison of Egypt and Israel and United States. It just seems to hint at how can we apply this? How can Papa John apply this to my world? Verse 26, here goes Matthew taking us through verse 26. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots, 1,200 horsemen, and he stationed the chariot cities with the king of Jerusalem. Verse 27, 8, and 9, Matthew's going to take us through all of those. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. Wow. And he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore tree that are in the vale for abundance. And Solomon imported the horses from Egypt to Kue, and the king's traders received them from, how do you say it, Anatolia at a price. Verse 29, a chariot could be imported to Egypt for 600 shekels of silver. And so through the king's traders, Matthew says, they were exporting. And all the kings of the Hittites, up north, and the kings of Syria. So King Solomon now had become a warlord, profiting off of the violence. Now there's one verse that I think those of us who are privy to the New Testament can't really ignore. And that's verses 14 and 15, where it says, now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. besides that which came from the explorers, from the businesses and the merchants. So then Matthew says, in regards to the number 666, it's the only other place in the Bible where 666 is mentioned, right here. And of course, it's in the book of Revelation. So Solomon, who became the new Pharaoh in this story, in the story of Exodus, and not only that, he's become the beast of Daniel chapter 7, if you will. And what does the mark of the beast look like? It looks like a 666. Well, there's a lot of opinions about that, but I think 1 Kings chapter 9 and 10 gives us a pretty good glimpse of what the beast does and what the beast is capable of. And this scriptural trap is kind of a setup, but this isn't as in your face as some others. We actually don't even notice it in the way the story is written, but from the point of being an Israelite and then reading this account, you're supposed to say, wait a second, this isn't good. Instead of being the holy and set apart, the people of Israel have now become the trophy of world domination. And think about it. In just 3 kings, they do it. And well, there's only 3 kings. That's how fastly they self-destruct. I shouldn't interrupt, but my mind goes there. The trophy of the world is such a short-lived cycle. And then without Matthew Vanderell, I wouldn't have realized this chapter is a shadow picture or an overlay of the kingdom of Egypt, and that how Israel has basically copied and become the new Egyptian superpower. And then we can apply it to our day as well. Well, Matthew ends his footnote in this episode by just saying this: they have become what they were freed from, essentially. They have become the new Egypt. And of course, from here, Solomon dies, and the whole nation splits because of his son. And Israel continues to go down, down, down. And yeah, these are the stories of the Bible that are framed out to have these lessons built into them that we sometimes miss. I think America, Matthew says, has missed the lesson of King Solomon. Look at our military power. Look at our wealth. So wait a minute. Military power, now using gold to manipulate other countries for politics, making other people their slaves, taking over places, making military outposts all over the place like our U.S. territories and such. Yes, Matthew says, I think we've definitely missed that message. But if your goal is to become an empire like the beast in Daniel chapter 7, then King Solomon definitely has a roadmap on how to do that successfully. This is humbling, and it's something that causes a lot of self-reflection. Wow, isn't that an unexpected turn? I really appreciate Matthew Vanderell. I found it of value, and I inserted it intentionally as part of the Papa John scripture notes as he taught from this a few years ago, and it caught my attention. I hope it catches yours. May we have eyes to see and ears to hear, eyes to see and understand what God has taught us and would have us do. Remember, the promise still stands: if you'll be my people, if you'll follow my holiness code, you will be my people and I will be your God. And not only will I provide for you, I will protect you. And all of this method of what we see happening in our day today and what we see happening back with King Solomon and what we escaped from, the image of we being the slaves that came out of Egypt and going to Mount Sinai and being included in the number scripturally, metaphorically, adopted into the house of Israel. May we have the eyes to see, and may the Spirit confirm what we need to focus on that we can change and improve on, is my prayer, and I look forward to talking to each of you again very soon.